Ajnanatimirandasya Dhyananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitanjena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Gurave Gaura Chandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadabhaktaya Namo Namaha. Yam Pravajantam Anupeta Apeta Krityam Rapayano Viraha Katara Ajuhava Putreti Tan Mayataya Taravo Binedus Tam Savabhutam Hridaya Munimanatosmi Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaivanarottamam Devim Saraswatam Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat Bhaktya Vihina Parada Lakshay Kiptaschakamari Tarangamadye Kripa Mai Tvam Sharanam Prapanna Brinde Namaste Charanarvindam Tave Vasmi Najivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayanam Charanandike Vancha Kalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhubheva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we're going to continue here in the seventh rainfall, first stream of the beautiful Chaitanya Shikshamrita, composed by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And we've been hearing about the nature of Transcendental Rasa. What is the nature of that eternal blissful Rasa? What are its ingredients? Remember, Sthayi Bhav, permanent ecstatic emotion. What is our identity and in what flavor, right? Servitude, friendship, parental affection, or conjugal love. Then what is the Vaibhav, the causes of Bhav? I think he'll get into that later more. The Alambana, like the foundation, Vishaya and Ashraya, and the Udipan, the stimulants for that. Then Anubhav, external symptoms that manifest in the body, probably more about that later. It's also described in Jaiva Dharma, like roaring, expressing, dancing. Varichav, Vyabhichari bhavs or Sanchari bhavs, transitory emotions, even such extreme emotions like dread. Right? And he didn't mention the Sattvika bhavs here, the internal emotions, but which he does describe in Jaiva Dharma, and it's also in the Madhurya Kadambini. But then there's also material rasa, so that we could compare the two, because we only know material rasa. And there's every danger that in the study of spiritual truth, spiritual science, we impose our limited conceptions on that which is eternal and transcendental. So he makes that very clear distinction, the difference between material and spiritual rasa. Now the person qualified for this transcendental rasa, okay, we may or may not be qualified. I'm not. I'm aspiring for that. And I was actually in chapter 20 of Jaiva Dharma, it's a discussion on Vaidhi Bhakti. And in that, there's a description of all the limbs, 64 limbs of Vaidhi Bhakti. That's not all. Bhakti's unlimited. The main limbs, right? And in that, one of them is hearing these Srimad Bhagavatam, these higher topics about Rasa Lila, which we were discussing earlier, and Raghunath Das Babaji Maharaj was describing that this has to be heard from qualified persons, from realized persons, persons who are situated on that platform. And by that process, we get the proper understanding, right? Correct understanding. But also that process is not contaminated by impure ideas and impure motives. That many people study the Bhagavatam and even speak it professionally, and they're very adroit, very learned, very great storytellers, but their intentions in their activity is for material gain, right? Material wealth, praise, position, all the different things, gross and subtle, which people aspire for. And that kind of hearing is not only not beneficial, but it will take you off the track completely. And I remember being in India, and when we were in Bangalore, there are always signs up everywhere of this person or that person who is giving Bhagavad Saptaha. In fact, there are schools for that, where young, very intelligent young boys, usually Brahmin boys, are sent there by their family, and they learn all that. They learn the Bhagavatam, at least all the stories. They memorize great swaths of it, and they learn how to present it. Then those schools kind of set them up, help them to develop programs, clientele like this and that, and they get a lot of money, and for many years they pay a portion of that back to the school, right? So it's kind of a business. And I know that there were some brahmacharis that wanted to go hear from them because they wanted to hear the stories, how they were developing it and how they expressed it, because they knew that these people were very popular. And I said, don't do that. That's not going to be beneficial for you. You won't learn anything, and you can become contaminated by their own inappropriate motives, and they don't have any realization, and you won't get anything except something mundane. And it could even drag you a bit away from your own understanding and appreciation of the nature and purpose of bhakti. But some went. And I have to say, those that did go, I've seen some of them have their own struggles over the years. So whether it was a result of that experience or that was the nature, they still had many things to overcome, but it didn't work for them. So we're going to hear about the qualification, who is qualified for this Transcendental Rasa. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, some groups of persons utilize illicit relations with women in order to assist in their sadhana, thinking they will achieve Shringar Rasa, the transcendental conjugal mellow. These sinful endeavors are simply defamatory and the cause of misfortune for them as well as for society. They do what is strictly forbidden, and the result is that they fall into an abyss for all time. So during the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there were many such persons. In fact, the reputation of Gaudiya Vaishnavas had fallen very far because many people who claimed to be Gaudiya Vaishnavas were doing this practice, saying that in order to understand Shringar Rasa, the Parikiya mood of Radha and Krishna, then we have to taste that in this world, right? So they would encourage women to have relations with them, married women, single women, whatever. And because it was illicit, very strict society and frowned upon, that fear, that anxiety, the trials and endeavors, then we can understand what Krishna and the gopis are experiencing. And then we can enter into this. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur fought against that, and there's some very famous stories about that. But don't think that that's confined only to his time. In fact, even in contemporary times, there are personalities, even within or that have emerged from various branches of our own societies who do that same thing, who go around and have these illicit relationships and claim that this is a means for spiritual growth, either by surrendering oneself completely, no matter how terrible it seems to be, to one's guru, right, who is non-different from Sri Hari, right, Sakshad Hari, therefore relationship with guru, it's not tainted, right? And then others who espouse that same thing that I just mentioned, that, well, we know it's illicit, but by doing this together, and after all, I'm a sannyasi, so it's okay, then we will understand what Sringar Ras really is. Right now, we're bound by rules and regulations of Vaidhi Bhakti, so we can't enter into the higher sentiments of Raganuga. But if we have this forbidden relationship, then we cast off the chains of Vaidhi Bhakti and enter into the secrets of Raganuga. This is, and people do this. And, it's not unheard of. So this is bad. It's sinful. You lose your bhakti in that way. They do what is strictly forbidden, and the result is that they fall into an abyss for all time. The sadhaks of Ras should be especially careful in this regard. One should never hear the fallacious opinions of pretentious pseudo-religionists and debauchees who have uncontrolled senses. Okay. Oh, here, there's a little diagram of the components of Bhakti Ras. Nice diagram. I'll take a picture for our class, our Discord class. There we go. We are. I don't know how clear that's going to come out. Okay. And I'll just show it here. Does it come? Oh, I think it comes up backwards. All right. Anyway, it's got Staibhav, which we described. Vaibhav, again, Alambana and Udipan. Alambana means that in which rati is tasted. And so there's the Vishaya Alambana, the object of rati, Sri Krishna, and Ashraya Alambana, the reservoir of rati, the devotee. Right? And so for the inhabitants of Vrindavan, Krishna is their Vishaya. He's the object of their love. And they are the reservoirs, the abode, the vessels of that love. But in Krishna's heart, his devotees are the objects of his love. And he is the reservoir of love for them. Right? And then there's Udipan, that which is stimulates rati, like the sound of a flute, the vision of a peacock feather, the dark rain clouds, the color of Krishna, all these different things in Vrindavan that remind one. And remember when Uddhava went to visit the inhabitants of Vrindavan, especially Nanda and Jashoda, and then later the gopis, he was trying to assuage their separation, right? And Nanda Maharaj had not left the home. He was simply weeping in the house. Yashoda couldn't even speak. But Uddhava was telling him, why don't you go outside? You're inside, and if you go out, then you may get back into life, take care of the cows, do this and that. And Nanda Maharaj said, well, how can I go out? Everywhere I go, it reminds me of Krishna. Right? I can't. I go here, and I see him on the path going out with his cowherd boyfriends and the cows. I go over there in the forest, and I see them wandering. I go to the cow sheds, and I remember him milking the cows. I go to the assembly hall, and I remember the wonderful times we had there. Everywhere he went was Udipan, and it caused him even fiercer separation. So, Udipan. Anubhav, visible actions that illustrate the spiritual emotions, dancing, singing, so on. Sattvika bhavs, the 8 symptoms that arise internally, right? When Vishuddha Sattva descends into the body of the sadhak, it interacts with the different elements within the body and causes various kinds of symptoms to manifest, like horripilation and tears and choking of voice and being stunned, right? And then Vyabhichari, the transitory spiritual emotions, which give so much variety to the taste and expression of prema. So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur goes on. Only persons who have attained detachment from materialistic enjoyment and who have had an awakening of prema within themselves are qualified for ras. Okay. Those who are not detached from material enjoyment and have not had an awakening of pure rati within their heart are unqualified for ras. If such unqualified persons endeavor for ras, they will definitely be deviated from the path and become entangled in illicit activities. So that's a very high, mature state in Bhav Bhakti. So that's a warning that the activities, the emotions, the expressions in their mature fulfillment, which we know as ras, is still somewhat distant from us according to where we're at. If we're in the Madhyam platform, it's very distant. We can certainly hear about it and taste a shadow of it, but in the Bhakti Tattva Vivek of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he explains that this is still Bhakti Abhas. Even when one is emerged and is beginning to chant Shuddha Nam, awakening deep attachment to Radha and Krishna, to Vrindavan, it's not mature. There's not full realization of oneself and one's relationship, and there's still some connection with matter, right? As long as one is embodied. This concept of ras, as we mentioned yesterday, the real nature of ras, it may take even a few lifetimes situated in Bhav Bhakti before it becomes completely mature. And in that regard, we always, kind of go back to the hints of that in Srimad Bhagavatam. Remember the other day we were talking about the purification process through hearing and chanting. Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Nasta Praye Sabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Right. Impurities disappear. One becomes fixed in bhakti. But then evam prasanna manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha bhagavad tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate, right? Then that is a description of one becoming freed from the lower influence, right, of passion and ignorance, and becomes, wait a minute, let me get this, and becomes established in sattva-gun. Sattva-gun. Not Shuddha Sattva yet, but Sattva-gun. And Sattva-gun is very close to Shuddha Sattva, but there's still some connection with the material energy. But the qualities of Sattva-gun, this is where Mahamaya, Durga, Parvati, where she assists the devotees. When one is turned their face from Bhagavan, from devotion and love, then the material energy only acts to cover us and reward the fruits and punishment of our activities in this world. But when one takes to bhakti, that same energy that was used to cover us then she begins to give us assistance, right? And the assistance would be the sattva gun. And one of the qualities of sattva gun is peacefulness, illumination, right? Awakening of a greater capacity to understand, detachment from the material world, all these different things. In the practice of our bhakti, these subsidiary fruits begin to manifest. But still, we have to go further, right? So then, this, wait a minute, I think I did this wrong here. Yeah, sorry, quoted my verses out of order. Old brain. Tadarajas tamo bhava kama lo badayas chaye cheta etayar avidam stitvam sattve proceedati. After nasta prayasa bhadreshu, bhaktir bhavati naistaki, after irrevocable devotional service is established, then passion and ignorance, lust and desire, hankering, these disappear from the heart, and artha vritti becomes very firmly established, and then you become in the mode of goodness, right? But then after that, then is evam prasanna manaso, Bhagavad Bhakti Yogataha, Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam Mukta Sangasya Jayate. Now that is when you become situated in Shuddha Sattva. When Shuddha Sattva descends into the heart. And that means, he says, thus established in unalloyed goodness, right? Shuddha Sattva, mode of goodness not touched by the modes of nature. The mind enlivened by contact of devotional service to the Lord gains positive scientific knowledge of the personality of Godhead. Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam. Srila Prabhupada always quote Vigyan as scientific knowledge, right? Realized knowledge, right? And this is when one begins to recognize one's own identity. One can perceive the Lord within the heart, one's identity, one's service, all of that begins to awaken in that stage above. And then, vidyate hridaya grantish chidyante sarva samshaya shiyante chasya karmane drishta evatmanishvare. Thus the knot of the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as the master. So one's directly perceiving one's own spiritual identity, Krishna's identity, our relationship, right? This is awakening of that, the maturation, let's say, of that stage of bhav. And that goes to what we had heard before. Vrikididam vraja vadudir idam cha Vishnu. When one comes to that mature stage of bhav and prem, then finally all the last misgivings are cut to pieces. So that all goes back to the idea of hearing about this subject matter step by step, and by hearing about it appropriately under guidance. No, we're not eligible for Ras, but we're eligible to hear about it. And if we hear about it in the proper way, then step by step, this is the result that happens. And in proper way, I mean according to the commentaries of our acharyas and under the guidance of self-realized personalities, our Guru Varga, right? So, and then Sutta Goswami explained, therefore, since time immemorial, all transcendentalists have been rendering devotional service to Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, with great delight, because such devotional service is enlivening to the self. So in that chapter, he gives us a preview of the process of bhakti, describing it early in the chapter. Savai pung sang paro dharmo, jato bhakti dahokaje, right? Ahoitukya pratyata atma supersediti, that this bhakti is the highest dharma. This is the conclusion of all the scripture. And then going through, okay, maybe you're all understanding the practice of varnashram dharma and all your duties in this world. Yes, yes, yes. Do so. But understand that the objective of all of that is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. And if you don't do that, then it's shrama eva hi kevalam, then it's a useless waste of time. And then how do you do it? Well, therefore, you should hear and chant about the Lord. How do you develop attraction for that? You serve great souls. Shushusho shadadanasya vasudeva kataruchi syan mahat sevaya vipra. Right? You serve these great souls. And then from that, you develop this attraction, and then that progression from Shinvatam Swakatak Krishna, Nastapraya Subhadreshu, Dada Rajastano Bhava, Evam Prasanna Manaso, right? Step by step by step. So, Ras is the state that naturally occurs within the person and whose heart prema has arisen. That last stage. Again, that's when real Ras manifests. Everything else is building up to that. And that doesn't diminish the quality and the glory of each of these stages. They're profound. And even in the Madhyam stage, right, in the very beginning, it's so wonderful once we come to Shuddhanam that from then on we're galloping in our bhakti. In the Kanishta stage, if we're not serious, we could stay on this platform for hundreds of years, hundreds of lifetimes, actually. I remember being in a lecture by Srila Bhaktivedanta Rai Maharaj. It was in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. Where was it? It was Pleasant Hill, at some hall that was rented. And it was actually an Ekadashi day, or evening. And he gave a lecture, which was later entitled This Dangerous Time. And he was saying that, well, so many people, they come to bhakti and they become comfortable in this beginning stage, because even in the beginning stage, so much material relief comes, right? So much freedom from the miseries of the material world. But we still maintain our attachments, right? And so we sort of float on this stage where we aren't so serious. We practice bhakti some, but we also are somewhat loose, and we allow ourselves to be distracted by various degrees of material enjoyment, right? However they manifest, right? And he said that you can stay on this platform for hundreds of lifetimes. You have to make a concerted effort to come to the Madhyam stage. And that first leap is that stage of Nishta, whereby the strength of intelligence and faith, we control the mind, we control the senses, and we just stay fixed in bhakti. And in that chapter 20 of Jaiva Dharma, in the conversation between Brajanath Vijay Kumar and Raghunath Das Babaji Maharaj, he was saying that means that we have to be very fixed in giving up association of persons who are not going to encourage us, who are not favorable to our bhakti, because as long as we associate with them, we'll take on their qualities and their attachments, right? So one of the most important things is remaining in a community of those who are determined and fixed, right? And especially hearing and serving pure devotees. And then also to really adopt this anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulya savarjanam, to understand that what is favorable for bhakti, and to do that, and to really reject things that are unfavorable. As long as we're not really attentive to that at all times, we're not going to come even to nishta, what to speak of entering into ruchi and shuddhanam. We can do it. We can do it. We have so much mercy pouring down on us from our acharyas. It's just within our grasp. Just have to recognize it. We're getting this guideline. That's why we hear this, because we become inspired by this incredible goal. And then along with it, we get the, okay, step by step. And can we do it alone? No. By our own strength, what do we have? We have nothing. Right? We're the tiny jiva soul. Maya, the material energy, is so powerful. But we pray for the assistance and help of our gurus, and from the Vaishnavas, and from Sri Krishna and Radhika themselves. Nityananda, Mahaprabhu, we pray to everyone. Help us, help us, help us. And it'll happen. So, Rasa is the state that naturally occurs within the person in whose heart prema has arisen. This deliberation upon the subject of Rasa is only a description of which emotions combine in which manner. Rasa is not included as a limb of sadhana. Thus, if anyone says, "Come, I will teach you the sadhana of Rasa," he is an impostor or a fool. Ooh, yeah, there's no sadhana. It's a state of maturity, of realization. And in that regard, he quotes, many verses from Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, so this is, first one is Krishna speaking to Uddhava in 11th canto, 14th chapter. Strinam stri sanginam sangam tattva durata atmavan sheme vivikta asinas chintayan mam atantrita. A self-realized soul, a self-realized person, should remain far away from associating with women and those intimately associated with women. Sitting fearlessly in a solitary place, one should concentrate the mind on me with great attention. Dhansi described that it's more dangerous to associate with persons who are attached. If you're a man, associating with persons attached to women, or if you're a woman, associating with persons who are attached to men. Because in their association, you're seeing their activities, you're hearing their talk, and it naturally rubs off on you. So sitting in a solitary place, what does that mean? That means free from that kind of asatsanga, that unfavorable association, and associating with devotees. That's a good place. Then in the 9th canto, 19th chapter, Matra swastra duhitrava naviktasano bhavet balavan indriya gramo vidvang sang apikarshati. One should never sit alone on the same seat, even with one's own mother, sister, or daughter, for the senses are so strong that they can even deviate a person who is very advanced in knowledge. That's very powerful. Because the senses, they're independent. they just act. They have their own attraction to their natural objects. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that if you're sitting there that you're going to necessarily consciously, I want to have sex with my mother or sister or whatever. But in so many subtle ways, it creates attachment on the material platform, right? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati one time, his own mother came to visit him, and the devotees left the room. And afterwards, I believe even though the door was open, he asked them, "Why you left me alone? You should never leave me alone, even with my own mother." Teaching. There's one famous Christian preacher. He's left his body. I mean, he was very famous 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, Billy Graham. And he was very charismatic, very effective evangelicist. He would speak to entire stadiums full of people, and people would be inspired and change their lives. One time, 5 people came to assassinate him for whatever reason. And in that assembly, when they heard him speak, one of the persons later, he broke down and began to cry. And he dropped his gun, and he went up and he surrendered. And he was surprised to see his associates had also done the same thing. And Billy Graham, he would never be alone in a room with a woman. Because, recognizing this same thing, but also he didn't want any taint of suspicion on his character, right? So, then third canto, 31st chapter. Sangam na kuryat pramadasujatu yogasya param arurukshuhu matsevaya pratilabdatma labdo vadantiya niraya dvaramasya. Those who desire to obtain Krishna Prem, which is the ultimate fruit of bhakti yoga, should never indulge in illicit association with women. Learned sages who know the absolute truth say that for those who desire liberation from material existence and attainment of the lotus feet of the Lord, illicit connection with women opens wide the door to hell. So that's very strict, and it applies equally to women associating with men. And so that's a guideline, especially because in modern society, Kali Yuga, free association between men and women is the norm. It's quite common. And so-called spiritualists, therefore, associate. And even some people who have taken the role of guru, taken up that role, will associate in a way that's actually inappropriate with ladies, like with the children of their disciples or young girls who are now their disciples. They'll surround themselves with them, even put their arms around them in an affectionate embrace. Oh, I'm like a father. I feel so much vatsalya to this person, to this girl. But as long as you're conditioned, you can't do that. There's one Gaudiya Mat sannyasi. Now, this is not to make an aspersion onto ladies, because you could just say the opposite for men. But as an example, and someone told this to me one time because I was being friendly with some young girl, right? So a little girl in the mat, it was in Vrindavan, and, just to encourage her, I was being friendly and all. And this other sannyasi came up to me and he told me this story, how he's doing a similar thing, and one old Gaudiya Mat sannyasi came up to him and said, "Oh, so young snakes don't have poison?" And he thought, what? Baby snakes don't have poison? And actually baby snakes, rattlers, kraits, whatever, they're more dangerous, because older snakes, they may or may not inject it, just a dry bite. They know how much to release or not release. But baby snakes, they just bite and everything. So here's a warning that any kind of that association can be unfavorable. I have to be careful, very, very careful. And so other gurus also, they may associate inappropriately with their grown-up female disciples. And some even take massage from them, touch them, allow them to touch their body. Oh, it's service. They're like my daughter. Can never do that. And I mean, and the proof is, self-realized souls, they won't act like that because they're setting the example. They'll be strict. They can be full of affection and love for all their disciples, and they'll show it in their glances and their sweet words and their kindness. And those disciples, they don't feel any lack. There's no need for that physical contact, right? And on rare occasion, they may even pet their daughter on the head. But even that, they don't do very often. Very strict. So, then another verse from that same section, 3rd canto, 31st chapter. One who associates with pious persons, my eyes read the same thing, wrong thing. One who associates with persons averse to the service of Sri Krishna becomes devoid of truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, control of speech, gravity, spiritual intelligence, shyness, austerity, fame, forgiveness, control of the mind, control of the senses, all good fortune, and all such opportunities. One should understand that the association of a foolish, unholy, disturbed, non-devotee soul killer who is bereft of the knowledge of self-realization and who is no more than a dancing dog in the hands of a woman is extremely detrimental, and thus one should give them up completely. Right. So we always have that example of an iron rod in the fire, right? And that's the example of someone associating with a great devotee. You take on the qualities of the devotee. Right? And the iron rod becomes infused with the qualities of the fire. Fire enters into that rod and it becomes fire-like. Right? But the other example is like a crystal, clear crystal. And whatever color you hold it up against, it reflects that color. So the soul, whoever we associate with, will take on the qualities of those people we associate with. A Mahabhagwat, they can associate with anyone, and their qualities will be passed on. But in the weakened state, if we associate with persons who are unfavorable, then it creates unfavorable conditions in our heart. Now the question arises, what about grihastas? They may be involved in family life, and they have, especially in India, or you've got extended families all living together. Maybe you're a devotee and many in the family are not. Or what about in your work? You got to go to work, and the people that you work with are not devotees. So, in the Jaiva Dharma, that question is asked, and in the dialogue that Bhaktivinoda Thakur recounts, the instruction is that you don't associate intimately. In other words, you do your job, you do your social duty, your familial duties, but you keep your bhakti, your treasure, very close in your heart. Like camphor. Camphor is very volatile. It's very precious, and you keep it in an airtight little box. Now, if you open it up and expose it to everybody or to the air, it can evaporate and disappear quickly. Even without burning it, it'll go away. And so our bhakti, it's like a treasure, and especially in the early stages, which we're all in. Even Madhyam is, and it's very advanced, but compared to Bhav, you could say it's early. You have to be careful how you associate with others. So you know how they say, don't cast your pearls before swine? Or Srila Prabhupada said, if you offer the hog first-class halava, he will say, no, sir, stool. Give me stool. Right? People will not appreciate your sentiments, and they may commit some offense, some aparad, dismiss. That's harmful to the heart. So in the Madhyam stage, there's guidelines of who to associate with and how to associate. Prema, Maitri, Kripa, Upeksha, right? For the Lord, And as eternal associates, we show love, prema, show devotion, and service. Maitri, for those who are like-minded devotees on the path with us, we develop friendship. It's favorable. We love them. Oh, they're our God brothers, our God sisters. And the older you get, the more affection you have for them. Your appreciation for them begins to mature. Right? Friendship, because they're so valuable. They're such an example, such an inspiration. And for those who are less developed, as devotees, or who are ignorant but innocent, you show mercy, kripa. Right? You give them instruction, give them kindness, give them inspiration. And for those who are inimical, you avoid. Right? Apeksha, just neglect. Because if you try to preach to them, they may say very ugly things, which can hurt your heart. And sometimes you think, well, but we want to preach to everyone. Yes, we do. And Nityananda, Haridas, they showed the greatest example by going before Jagai and Madhai. But they were personalities of the highest level, and they could inject faith into the heart of anyone. We can go out everywhere and try to approach everyone, but if someone is exhibiting very inimical sentiments and moods, then you just neglect. I remember when we were young, our mood was so strong that we would want to go preach everywhere, but we'd also want to defeat everybody. And so sometimes we'd get into prolonged arguments with very nasty atheistic persons who said terrible things. And I can remember some of those terrible things to this day. Right? So their harsh words enter the heart and pierce the heart. And you're not doing them any favors because they're just engaging. You're allowing them to engage in terrible aparad, which was an obstacle for any development of affection, for priti of the Lord. Apa, Radha. Radha means love, affection for the Lord. And apa means which is against. So we don't want them. Right? So we're getting all these great guidelines. We'll stop here at this point, and tomorrow we'll read about the 5 bhavs. Right? Right. So the last thing we read was the deliberation upon the subject of Rasa is only a description of which emotions combine in which manner. It's just a description. Rasa is not included as a limb of sadhana. Thus, if anyone says, "Come, I will teach you the sadhana of Rasa," he is an impostor or a fool. That's because Rasa, it's a state, a combining of all those elements of perfection. Generally in bhakti, the limbs of bhakti like Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Sadhya and Sadhana are the same. It's just that bhakti is immature in the sadhana stage, but we're doing the same practice. We're hearing and chanting and remembering. But Ras is not a practice, it's a state of consciousness, right? There's nothing you can do to imitate it that will bring it up. We have to, when our bhakti becomes absolutely mature, then Ras becomes realized in the heart. So, anyway, we'll stop here. Okay.